Okay, I can't hear anybody. Somebody's counting me down.
And we're live.
Hello, welcome to Skeptic Haven and our brand new channel, The Thought Experiment, where we're going to be doing debates periodically. This is our first episode, so please forgive us any technical errors we may be making behind the scenes. We're still trying to figure some of this out. Today we're going to be debating the problem of evil, and our two debaters are going to be Father James Gad, sometimes referred to as Father James Gad or James Gad, who's an Anglican priest and online personality known for his journey from being a Baptist to becoming an Anglo-Catholic. He was raised in the Baptist tradition, but experienced a period of personal doubt. This led him to various Christian denominations, including Roman Catholic, Episcopal, Nazarene, and other United Methodist Church. He's been ordained as a deacon in the Church of Confessing Anglicans on October 14th, 2023. He is often associated with the Barely Protestant moniker in online dialogues and is known for defending Anglo-Catholic views on topics like the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist and Marian devotion. He is an active participant in online theological discussions, particularly within Anglican and Catholic social media groups. Our other debater is John Loftus, who is a philosopher and counter-apologist who's earned a Master of Arts, a Master of Divinity, and a Master's in Theology degree, the last of which was under William Lane Craig. John has also studied in a PhD program at Marquette University. He's the Debunking Christianity blog owner and author of 5 critically acclaimed books: Why I Became an Atheist, The Outsider Test for Faith, How to Defend the Christian Faith, Unapologetic, and God or Godless with Randall Rouser. He's also the editor of 7 critically acclaimed anthologies: The Christian Delusion, The End of Christianity, Christianity is Not Great, Christianity in the Light of Science, The Case Against Miracles, Varieties of Jesus Mythicism, and God and Horrendous Suffering. Our format today is we're going to give each of our debaters a 10-minute opening, a 5-minute rebuttal to that opening, and then there'll be 2 sets of 10-minute cross-examinations where we'll be alternating between our debaters. They'll each then get 5 minutes to offer their concluding thoughts. We'll have a Q&A afterwards for everybody who is watching. We will give priority to Super Chats. So ask your questions, give us those Super Chats. We'd appreciate it. And so if we are ready to bring our debaters on screen. And there's John. And there's Father James. All right. So, Father James, you are going first with your 10-minute opening.
All right, just let me know when to begin.
Go ahead.
All right, yes, I am Father James. I just want to clarify some things just at the intro. There were some errors in it. I've never been Roman Catholic, if that's what was
I'm
said.
sorry.
Or Nazarene or United Methodist. And I've never really talked about Marian devotion much, if at all.
Okay.
So just a few different errors, but that's what I wanted to clarify that, just if there was any confusion.
My apologies for getting your bio wrong. This is what I was given. So I apologize for that. That was entirely my mistake.
No worries. All right, so let's go ahead with that cleared out. Let's go ahead and continue. Our debate this afternoon is over the statement, quote, "Horrendous suffering does not make atheism more likely than theism." I am holding the affirmative, and John is holding the negative. So I'm holding the positive position where I'm establishing this as what I would claim to be as true. The burden of proof is therefore on me then to establish that this claim is more plausibly true than its negation. All right. So with that given, I want to go over 2 main points here, and I'm going to go through them, get into detail, but I want to establish them first. So from my perspective, first thing is absent suffering, it seems obvious that God exists. Now, I did message John and the group just before because I wanted to make sure I wasn't sure exactly what his position was on that. He disagrees with me, so we'll probably go into that later on. And then the second one is that given that suffering exists, it is not clear why that would overcome the evidence that God exists. All right, so absent suffering, the first one, and then given that suffering exists, presuming the reality of it, it doesn't seem clear why that would therefore mean that God no longer exists. So absent suffering, it seems obvious that God exists. John, again, has told me that he does not agree with this statement, so I'd love to get into that discussion with him at some time, perhaps if need be during the cross-examination. But it seems obvious, first, given the order of the universe, the complexity of the apparent design of creation, from the single-celled amoebas to humanity, to the brain of humans. These are things that are incredibly complex, and it does not seem clear and obvious that it is more likely that these the were guideless mechanisms that lead to then evolutionary thing that is unguided entirely, that we then have the all before us. So it also, and when I say unguided, what I mean is unguided by a mind. Um, it also just seems obvious that the first act of reality must be a self-willed act. So again, absent any question of suffering, we have to ask, well, wait a minute, what is the first action that has happened in all of reality? If you were to rewind, I'm an older millennial, so I'm old enough to remember VHS. If you were to rewind the tape all the way back to the beginning of all of reality, of all of existence, what was that first act? It only makes sense that there can be a self-willed act. The other possible attempts at options don't make sense. If you have, for instance, a previous act, well, then we're no longer talking about the first act. So what caused that previous act, and then what caused that previous act, if we're talking about unwilled acts, and if it is a sort of domino effect all the way back ad infinitum, then that seems, how do we, that causes the question of how do we get to today then? If it takes forever to go through a line that is forever, well, then how did we get to today if it's an infinite backwards? So those are two objections to the claim that God does not exist, or it is more likely that God does not exist, even absent the question of suffering. Now, we all agree that to some degree suffering does exist. So that is the reality that we're dealing with. So I'm dealing with the fact that we have, again, not again, but the majority of humanity does seem to agree that God exists. That is a majority position. So given that, the majority of humanity also agrees that suffering exists. How does the majority reconcile these two positions together? Because everyone goes to some degree or another of suffering. The question here then is, are people just being sort of irrational, or how are they sort of thinking through this sort of thing? Now, religion, people's own spiritual thoughts and wonderings have brought them to different conclusions, but along the same pathways largely. So the first one is, given that suffering exists, we're questioning whether or not God exists. The answer or rebuttal to that is, well, all that is needed is that there be a morally sufficient reason for God to allow suffering. And we can go into particular examples of suffering and then give those morally sufficient reasons for that allowance of suffering. The sort of example that is constantly used is the idea of the gym workout, right? There's a degree of suffering that goes on in the gym, but there is a benefit that goes into it that causes people to want to desire to go through that suffering so that they can have a better outcome. Now, we're talking about horrendous suffering, so I'm using this as a much weaker thing that would not obviously be anything more than just sort of an analogous sort of thing. Now, also, going back to that majority of people, why is it that the majority of people who have experienced suffering still believe God exists? Because to them, it does not seem clear that the suffering, therefore, negates all of the evidence of everything else in every other category. The reality of the complexity of our human bodies, the reality of the complexity of the universe itself, the reality that we instinctively understand that when we see what appears to be design, we understand we are right in concluding that there is a designer in that. Now, given those points, I want to bring up two possible attempted refutations that the interlocutor John will have. The first one will be this claim of an ad populum. I've been pointing to the majority claims, and sometimes there's going to be a mix-up in understanding what an ad populum fallacy is. So I've pointed to the majority believing in God. That is not a fallacious use of ad populum. My argument was not fallaciously ad populum. If I were to say, for instance, the majority of people believe God exists, therefore God exists, that would be a fallacious form of ad populum. My point was not that. Rather, my point was most people believe God exists despite evil and suffering existing. Therefore, we're understanding this being the default position of humanity. So that's to be understood that I'm not pointing to God or the majority of people got understanding God exists, therefore it's true. We're putting this as the sort of default barrier because that is what is default believed by humanity. Second, there is going to be this argument when I point to things like complexity of life and the universe and the first cause and all these sorts of things. There's going to possibly be an argument of the God of the gaps. This is one of the most misunderstood sort of claims in scientific history. God of the gaps deals specifically with scientific inquiries being answered with a simple God directly did it. The most common example is the answer to the question, how does lightning appear? And then the answer being Zeus or God throws the lightning. That is not the sort of argument given in claims of God existing. Especially the ones that I have brought up here. Otherwise, the God of the gaps as a rebuttal would itself be nothing more than assuming atheism without allowance for any other option. In fact, it would be, if anything, a quote science of the gaps, where you don't allow anything other than science did it, or nature did it. And what we have to do is we have to recognize that unless we're going to just out of the ballpark be like the presuppositionalists and say, I do not allow for God's existence to be even a possible answer, well, then you can't just shoot every bit of evidence as God of the gaps when it even remotely relates to creation itself. How much time do I have left? I'm out. Okay.
Looks like our timer has broken. I don't guess. Someone else is keeping time. So hold on. Are we down to 1 minute? Okay, 1 minute.
I'll see the rest of my time. I'm good.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. And John, are you ready?
I am.
All right. John, go ahead.
All right, my contention is God probably doesn't exist given the existence of horrendous suffering. This debate focuses on the heinous, hideous, horrific levels of horrendous suffering given the belief in a theistic God who is all-powerful, all-knowing, and perfectly good. Unless we focus on that kind of suffering, the kind that seems needless and absolutely inexplicable, we'll fail to see this problem for what it is. Instead of focusing on bruises, sprained ankles, slaps on the cheek, a clump of hair being pulled out, or sicknesses like colds and the flu, let's focus instead on people who have been burned alive, boiled alive, and buried alive. God may well have good reasons to allow for a modest amount of pain since we have physical bodies and we will all die. So we can set that aside as largely uninteresting in this discussion. Horrendous suffering, by contrast, should be our focus. My perspective is a minimal facts approach to the problem of suffering. I'm arguing that God should not allow a specific kind of suffering, horrendous suffering. Failing to focus on it is a failure to honestly search for the truth. For when horrendous suffering is our focus, the standard theodicies don't work. My contention is that the theistic God probably doesn't exist given the existence of horrendous suffering. Just ask what we would expect to find if we woke up one morning for the very first time. Would we expect to find so much horrendous suffering on this planet? I submit that people would never guess there would be as much suffering as there is in our world if such a God existed. For it's clear that God should never allow it. We wouldn't expect the existence of God since he could prevent it, should prevent it, yet doesn't prevent it. It gets worse. The theistic God allowed horrendous suffering even though he should have prohibited it. He could have prohibited the many global earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, tsunamis, wildfires, droughts, famines, volcanic eruptions, landslides, and blizzards. He could have banned the ubiquitous kill or be killed law of predation in the animal kingdom, along with the horrendous suffering we human beings inflict upon others without making a valid distinction between good and bad people or adults and children. Given this present world, horrendous suffering exists because species evolve through an evolutionary process whereby the fittest species survive. There shouldn't even be a debate about this. The amount and the degree of horrific suffering on Earth throughout every millennium, century, decade, year, month, week, day, hour, minute, and second should prove all on its own that James is abysmally wrong, even though I like the guy. Just think of this as in terms of who has the greatest moral obligation to help someone who is suffering. Well, it's the person who knows of the suffering, who cares the most to alleviate it, and who has the greatest ability to alleviate it. Therefore, the person who has the greatest obligation to alleviate horrendous suffering is a theistic God if he exists. Anyone who is wholly good would be morally obligated to prevent horrendous suffering, especially if all it would take was a snap of the fingers. Think also in terms of good parents. They would never allow their children to experience horrendous suffering for any reason. While they're not omniscient, they couldn't possibly conceive of any circumstances that might justify its use for a greater good. They would never allow it under any circumstances. Parents would protect their children from horrendous suffering regardless of any lessons they might learn from it. They would certainly want all predators, killers, and rapists locked up in jails and prisons away from their children, because having a safe society is eminently more valuable than allowing really bad people to run amok. Consider D'Angelo Hill, a severely disabled 5-year-old boy who suffered critical life-threatening burns in an apartment fire. If an omniscient God couldn't have kept him away from that apartment fire, then an omnipotent God should have secretly extinguished it as soon as it started. Otherwise, a perfectly good God should have created us with a gland that injects morphine to deaden severe pain when needed. Concrete examples like these go on to show God doesn't do any miracles to alleviate suffering, for if God doesn't stop the most horrific instances of suffering, there's no reason to think he stops any lesser instances of suffering. If nothing else, the more instances of horrendous suffering, then the less likely God exists. Simply do the math from here. We're told God infinitely cares for every single individual enough to die for us all. So it follows that the sufferings of individual people cannot be justified by hindsight lessons learned from their sufferings from, say, the Holocaust. Otherwise, we would be mere pawns used by God to teach lessons to later generations. If God were to exploit us like that, the ends justify the means, and we wouldn't have any intrinsic value. We would only have instrumental value, but if we lacked intrinsic value, then God would never send his son Jesus to die for us. If theists object, then at a fundamental level, they don't think much of God's infinite love. For surely God would place his infinite knowledge and power into the service of his infinite love. But precisely because they experience a cruel world, they cannot believe in an infinitely loving God. So let me just turn to some concerns that God should have had when creating the world. First concern would be that we don't abuse the freedom given us. The giver of a gift is blameworthy if he or she knowingly gives gifts to people who will terribly abuse them. Any parent who gives a razor blade to a 2-year-old child is culpable if that child hurts himself or others with it. God, like a good parent, should have done likewise and not given us free will until we were responsible enough to use it wisely. God should have kept us from abusing our freedom by creating us with a stronger propensity to dislike wrongdoing in much the same way that we have an aversion to drinking motor oil. Such a deity could keep a person from hurting or killing someone if at the very thought of it, the person began to suffer severe nausea. A theistic God has many other means at his disposal. A heart attack could have killed Hitler and prevented World War II, and no one would have been the wiser. Furthermore, children shouldn't have to suffer severe punishments for their actions when they err. A little pain was a good thing so children could learn from their mistakes, but no caring father would let his children suffer the full brunt of their mistakes, certainly not with broken bones or being beaten within an inch of their lives. God can supposedly read our minds, so he can judge our character by our intentions alone. After noting our intentions to do harm, God could implant good thoughts into our heads to prevent us from actually carrying out them. Second concern God should have would be that the environment he placed us in will not cause us excessive suffering. At the very minimum, God should prevent all natural disasters. If such a God exists, the 2004 Indonesian tsunami that killed approximately 250,000 people should never have taken place. If God had prevented it with a miracle by stopping the underwater earthquake before it happened, no one would have been the wiser, precisely because it didn't happen. A theistic God should not have created predation in the animal world either. The amount of animal suffering is atrocious as creatures prey on one another to feed themselves. The extent of animal suffering cries out against the existence of a good God. This horrific suffering is perhaps the most difficult problem of all. In lieu of this, God should have created all living things as vegans like herbivores such as rabbits, deer, sheep, cows, and hippos. And in order to be sure there is enough vegetation for all of us, God could have reduced our mating cycles and our made edible vegetation like apple trees, corn stalks, wheat, and tomato plants grow as plenteous as wild weeds do today. An all-powerful God didn't even have to create us such that we needed to eat. God could sustain us with miraculously created nutrients inside our biological systems throughout our lives, and we wouldn't know anything different. Such a deity could simply do a perpetual miracle here. In fact, there's nothing prohibiting God from feeding us by the process of photosynthesis, just like plant life, thereby not requiring animals at all. I've got two more concerns that God should have been concerned about. A God should have created all human beings with one color of skin. That was easy. There has been too much institutional racism, race-based slavery, and too many tribalistic wars because we don't have the same color of skin. A God should have created us with a much stronger immune system so that there'd be no pandemics that decimate whole populations or chronic diseases like cancer, leukemia, or for that matter, babies born with deformed limbs, blindness, deafness, and so on. This is horrific suffering that God should never have allowed in his creation or as a punishment for the sins of Eden for our sins. We know that God can do this because of animals who have a much higher immune systems like ostriches, sharks, alligators, bats, hyenas, and vultures. Such a God could have created us with self-regenerating bodies. When we receive a cut, it heals itself over time, as does a sprained ankle or even a broken bone. But why can't an injured spinal cord heal itself? Why can't an amputated leg grow back in a few weeks? If that's all we experienced in this world, we wouldn't know any different. Many animals can regrow parts of their bodies and have been damaged or severed. Lizards can grow new tails. Sharks can replace lost teeth. Spiders can regrow legs. An octopus can regrow their arms. Starfish can even grow an entire body out of a severed arm. Such a deity should also have made all creatures capable of sexually self-producing, like zebra sharks, Komodo dragons, and others. If God had done this, it would eliminate gender discrimination and gay hate crimes, since there wouldn't be any gender or sexual difference between us. Am I done?
Yes, sir.
One last concern. I suppose I'll wait.
Oh, give me a sentence.
All right. A fourth concern would be that God would prevent a wide diversity of religions in the world, because if he'd had one religion and buttressed this with evidence and good morals, then we wouldn't have more religions that fight and kill each other.
All right. Father James, are you ready for your 5-minute rebuttal? There we go.
Yes, I am. Oh, I do
All
not
right.
see myself. I am not up there.
I see you, so give it just a second.
There we go. All right. Okay. Is there a timer on the thing itself, by the way? I guess I'll just look at the live recording part. Okay. Let's see. Looking at the rebuttal. So, what I put was a bunch of the arguments he gave or concerns he gave at the very end as well. So let's go ahead and go through these. See. So first, I want to preface it with this. Okay. So he talked about a mixture of things. He talked about natural suffering, so suffering that we see in nature, like the tsunamis, and such, but as well human-caused suffering. There's a recognition. I think he's aware of this. He seems to be aware of this. That you're going to have different answers or responses to different types of suffering. So when it comes to human suffering, well, the Christian answer obviously would be original sin. We are very, very, very sinful and evil people, and we willfully cause our own destruction in many ways, unfortunately. And I think that one of the most obvious evidences, theological evidences of reality, is original sin. So then, looking at ignoring that though, and going into things like natural suffering. So the question of tsunamis and other things like that. So. We do live in a fallen world. And I think one of the issues that happens in these discussions is that there is a presumption that the true reality is this universe that we have as it is, and that this is the eternal state of the universe. Where, at least from a Christian perspective, there is this understanding that there is the resurrection. The resurrection is where we see the renewal of this exact universe to where there is no more suffering. So when you compare the reality, even what's the what is it, 20 billion years or so? I don't remember the exact age of the universe by most scientists' sort of estimation today, but say it is 20 billion years, right? When you compare that 20 billion years, or the however many millions of years of humans, to the eternality of creation, then it is beyond smaller than the speck of a dust mite over the sun, you know? So then the question is, are we recognizing that this is the sort of practice field for us as humanity in preparation for the life to come? That, just as, again, that analogy that I used before of the gym is preparing us to have the body that we desire, which is a more fit body, a body that is able to do things better, all that sort of stuff. This time in the gym is what is preparing us for the time in the post-resurrected eternal life, the life that does not end. So he made an argument that God should not allow horrendous sufferings. I would like to see why he believes that is the case. He went a little bit into it, so I want to go in cross-examination with him about that. And he says here, let's see what else. The more intense, or the more instances of human suffering, the more evidence God does not exist. I would also like to see how that is defended. I don't really accept that at all. I don't find that obvious at all for any reason. So let's go over some of these points. Don't abuse freedom. The concerns, yes. Don't abuse the freedom given us. We don't have the ability to abuse the freedom given us. Well, I mean, I don't think any of us likes the nanny state, and it seems like that is the desire that you have for God. Do you really want God to be the nanny state? That's actually one of the most common sort of Christopher Hitchens arguments I hear, which is, we don't want God being the cosmic peeper who's constantly telling us who to sleep with and such. So it is interesting that something like, for instance, who you sleep with causes lots of STDs, kind of thing. When we just sleep around, that is a good reason to have, if anything, maybe a nanny state. But then a lot of atheists tend to not like that answer. Let's see what else. Stronger propensity to dislike evil. So if we have a stronger propensity to dislike evil and such, yeah, that is a very subjective line. That's the concern I have with this, because any point that you make on that line, you could always say it needs to be stronger. So what is the actual standard there for that? Children should have extreme children should not have extreme punishments. That again goes to the question of what is an extreme punishment. What is that standard for what's appropriate and not? Because we apparently both believe that punishments can and should happen. And when he says children, I'm assuming he means humans in general. The environment should not cause excessive suffering. Okay, again, what's that excessive suffering that we're talking about? Animal suffering. I've never been convinced by the arguments of animal suffering. I'd like to get into that to see exactly what the problem is there. Lack of hunger, use photosynthesis. Time's up. All right, well, we'll go ahead and go into the rest of those once we get to the cross-examination.
Okay. John, are you ready for your 5-minute rebuttal?
Let me just start with what he said last. Some of the last things I can remember a little bit better, I suppose. I tried to write them down, but can you see my mess? That's called a mess of notes. He talked about, he mentioned something about what is excessive suffering, and if someone suffers this much, then where do you draw the line? See, that those questions don't count when it comes to horrendous suffering. That's why I'm using a minimal approach to suffering. There's no debate here, because we're not talking about suffering that dances on the rim of, is this excessive or not? When we're talking about horrendous suffering, we're talking about this extreme kinds of suffering that everyone agrees is extreme, like that 5-year-old boy that I talked about who got burned in that apartment fire, or maybe a witch burning, or a mother who loses all of her children in a concentration camp and just barely survives with one leg and a cut out eye. These we don't have to debate that, you see. So even raising the question means, unfortunately, James, you're not getting the point. But that's okay. A lot of people don't. You have no answers. When I said that the standard theodicies don't work when we're talking about horrendous suffering, that's what I mean. That's the kind of stuff I mean. And I also go on to say that the reason why we don't want to believe in a God, we can't believe in a God, a good God, is because horrendous suffering makes that impossible. Not impossible, logically impossible. We don't have to go there. Just extremely improbable up to the point of refutation, that God is not going to be good, or he's not going to be knowledgeable, or he's not going to be powerful. You got to cut out something there. One of those attributes doesn't work. Now, he talked about whether or not this means God doesn't exist, and this is why I'm an atheist. Well, it's partially why I'm an atheist. It does tell me why a certain type of God doesn't exist. You see, we have a certain kind of problem, horrendous suffering, that makes a certain kind of God improbable to the extreme, to a point of reputation, and that is the God of theism, the one that says that he's all powerful, all knowing, and perfectly good. That kind of God cannot, survive scrutiny. When we talk about horrendous suffering, things that we can all agree about what is horrendous suffering. So that kind of God doesn't exist. Now, you might have a theistic God, or you might have a God that knows everything but doesn't have any power, or not much power at all. You might have a God who has all kinds of power, but stupid, incompetent, So, but the kind of God with the three attributes normally attributed to him in the theism, under theism, that kind of God that is improbable up to the point of refutation. Those are my favorite words there about that. So and the gym workout, I don't even know why you even bring that up, because again, that's horrendous suffering. You admitted it, James. You admitted, well, you said right afterwards, you said, well, I know we're not talking about that kind of suffering, but horrendous suffering. Well, then that shouldn't even have been included in your talk, because we're talking about not a gym workout to gain muscles. We're talking about someone hanging you up and slicing your muscles and your skin off your body. And that's the kind of horrendous suffering that has happened in the past in some tribes and some peoples, that we can say that kind of suffering is not going to be something that a theistic God would allow or call for or desire. Now, the majority thing, I don't see how you can bypass the fallacy there, the fallacy of the majority, populatum, I think is what it's called. Because you can see from polls that people are losing their faith in God because they're getting more educated, become more aware of the arguments and suffering around the globe. I can get that there. Your face there tells me I should quit.
No, you've got about 30 seconds.
Oh, well, I'm going to take that 30 seconds. I'm just going to say that only if you can expect very little of your God, James, can you believe. You would have to cut out horrendous suffering for sure. You could have to cut out the missions. You'd have to, or something. You have a very limited God to believe, because the horrendous suffering renders your current belief untenable.
Okay. James Gad, are you ready for your first 10-minute cross-examination? And you
Am I able to see him too while we're doing it?
Did you say something? Because I didn't hear you.
Yeah, I can't hear Father
Yeah,
James at all at the moment. There we go.
Can you hear me? Can you hear
I
me?
can hear you now. Yes.
Okay. Am I able to see him while we do the cross-examination?
You should both be on the screen at the same time. Yes.
Oh, that means like, oh, he's gonna see me grimace and groan. No, hide me.
This is going to
see me on the. Yeah, I don't see me on the screen, but that's okay. I'm presuming you guys see me at least on the screen, right?
I think they're trying to figure out. There we go. We got both. I show both of you on the screen. Hopefully that'll catch up.
All right. I'll go ahead and go. I'll start my 10 minutes now. All right. So, John, could you explain how my ad populum use was fallacious? Could you explain it?
Well, if you could correct, maybe you should state it again, because maybe I didn't get your point. Would you want to do that, or you want me just to answer based on what I remember, which is always faulty?
Yeah, so basically what I was saying was I was looking at the default expectation of the populace in general is that God exists despite the fact that suffering exists. I was not making a conclusion that therefore God exists. So how is it a fallacious argument if I am not concluding simply from the ad populum, therefore God exists?
Well, what are you concluding then? I mean, why did you bring that? If you're not concluding God exists from that, then why did you bring it up?
It's not your point to ask me questions at this point. All right, so
Okay, I'll put that one down.
This is yeah, John. You'll get your chance for a cross-examination next. So he is correct.
All right. So why should God prohibit horrendous suffering right now?
Because it's horrendous, and a good God shouldn't allow it.
Why is it that you say that a good God shouldn't allow it?
Well, I mean, if you, let me tell you this: I don't believe in God, but if God does exist, then this is my question to you, and that is, why would you invent, create, design a God?
Whatever it is, it's a great question you can ask on my on your time. On my time right now, though, I would like to know.
Am I supposed to?
You can't answer a question with a question in cross-examination.
Oh, okay. All right, no question.
All right.
Answer.
So you can answer, but you can't give a question in response because that cross-examination is my time to control. All right. So why is it? Why should God prohibit the horrendous suffering right now? Why should he? Why is it so bad that therefore God cannot exist, or it is more likely that God does not exist?
Well, because that the kind of God that is infinitely knowing and infinitely loving would not allow it. It seems like it's something that if you were an absolutely good person, James, I take it you are, I would not be I wouldn't walk around the corner of your church and find you molesting a child. You see, I mean, because by definition, you're the kind of person that wouldn't do that, and so I would find that to be some kind of inconsistency in who you are, and in the case of God, who He is.
Is it your position that God allowing for horrendous suffering is equivalent to a man molesting a child?
Well, I think that the answer to your question is God would not allow so much horrendous suffering. And I would take it that the D'Angelo case and any other case of horrendous suffering where God could do something about someone being molested or burned alive or something like that, he would do
Okay.
something
All
about it. And I gave plenty of
right.
suggestions of how he could have done
Okay.
that.
So who decides how much is too much suffering? Because you seem to be okay with the idea that some suffering might be acceptable, but the idea of horrendous suffering. So who decides how much is too much suffering?
We all do. I mean, I don't think I
Okay.
chose
Oh,
horrendous.
great answer.
I'm,
Great
I'm
answer. Thank you,
not.
sir.
I'm not answering. I'm not
Right.
asking a question.
No, no,
I
I'm saying
chose horrendous stuff.
great answer. I really appreciate that. That brings me to my next question. So, given that the majority of people have decided that God exists despite the fact that they all recognize horrendous suffering, does that not then mean that you admit and concede my point?
Well, I have a book called The Christian Delusion, and I back that up. I think people who believe in a good God who doesn't do anything about horrendous suffering, and when I say that, he doesn't do anything about horrendous suffering because horrendous suffering as a category of suffering stands above God doing anything about it. And I would say that because he doesn't do anything about suffering, he's not to be trusted or believed.
That doesn't answer my question. So, given that what you just said, that we as people decide how much is too much suffering, why is it that you are not concluding, therefore, that God more likely exists, since the majority of people admit that God exists and that human suffering and all suffering, all forms of suffering, I should say, exists, yet they still do not then deny God exists. The majority of people still hold to God existing in some form or another.
Unfortunately, it seems to me you're using pure sophistry to answer a problem
How's
you
it?
can't answer.
How's it
Be-
sophistry?
be-
I'm
oh,
not. I'm
because
not supposed to answer questions. I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be asking the questions. You're supposed to be answering the questions.
I'm gonna answer you. Okay. People believe things that are lies all the time. They believe delusions, and that's the alternative. Because I'm not going to give up the idea that God and horrendous
Okay.
suffering are compatible.
So,
They're
so
wrong,
then,
and they're
do you then? Okay, I've got very limited time. So then, do you rescind your claim that the people decide how much is too much suffering?
Oh, no. People do decide. I mean, that's why.
Okay. So since people have decided that God exists, they see no irreconcilability with God existing in the certain amount of suffering existing. How are you not conceding my point?
Some people aren't reasonable. I mean, we have to train people to
Okay,
learn to grow up to be
so then,
adults.
you have to then negate your claim earlier, which was that the people decide how much is proper suffering, how much is appropriate suffering. So who decides now? What is the
Reason,
appropriate amount
well,
of
it
suffering?
has to be. You can't. Not every person can agree. There's a lot of idiots out there. I'm talking about reasonable people who can look at something and say this is atrocious.
Okay,
Who weep uncontrollably to see a child slowly burned to
okay.
death. Now, if someone
How
doesn't
do
think that's horrendous
how do
suffering,
we define? Well,
I can't
I've
help
got
them.
limited time. I've got limited time. I'm sorry. How do we define who is a reasonable person then?
And since we're talking about horrendous suffering, someone is not being reasonable who can watch a child slowly burn to death. No, and then say God
Okay,
is good.
you gave an instance. I need a principle to understand this. You gave an
Suffering is
instance
evil.
that might help out with 0.001% of all of the entire subject itself. So, how do we establish who is reasonable enough for you to then determine? And have you done the research yourself? Have you researched and asked and surveyed all of humanity to find the reasonable people to then pull them and then say, okay, now this is the level of suffering that is appropriate for understanding that God exists, and above this amount of suffering, we can no longer justifiably say that God exists.
People people who are reasonable will agree with my arguments because I think my arguments are very good. That horrendous suffering defeats any belief in a good, omnipotent, knowing God, and
That
I
was
back
nothing
it
more than
up.
an assertion.
All
That
you
was
can
nothing more than an
say,
assertion. Can you
all,
back
all
that
you
up?
can say is that you haven't decided. You can't decide who reasonable people are, and so that's your getaway.
I'm
That's your.
trying to find. It's not a getaway. I'm trying to find I'm trying to find out how you establish what a reasonable amount of suffering is, given that that is what we have to talk about. That is a central part of this whole entire debate. It's not some tertiary point. So please,
That's sophistry. That's sophistry.
you give me it's how is this sophistry?
Do you want me to repeat myself? I mean, you watch a child. Let's just say somebody grabs a child off a school bus and takes him and causes him untold suffering for years in a basement.
Okay. How does pointing to a situation like that demonstrate that what I'm doing is sophistry?
Well, because there are believers who see those kinds of acts or hear about them, and they do.
Am I defending that?
No, that's what I hope not.
Why does it matter?
Why does it matter about
for the argument that we're talking about? For the argument that we're talking about, why does that matter? Because you claimed I was being a sophist, and you're pointing to a child getting kidnapped. Why is that relevant to the claim that I'm a sophist?
Well, what you're doing, you're trying to show that horrendous suffering is not going to be something that's going to deconstruct your belief in a all good, all omnipotent God.
I asked for a simple point, and I will say it again. Who decides what is the appropriate level of suffering?
People do.
Given that the majority of
trees
people,
don't do it, rocks and cement trucks don't do it.
Given that the majority of people that we know claim God exists while claiming that suffering and evil exist, how have you not conceded the debate and said, therefore, my position is correct, that it is more likely that God exists, given that they find it reconcilable?
And John,
people around the globe.
Now, John, are you ready for your first set of cross-examinations?
I'm going to start right now. People around the globe, it's my turn. People around the globe disagree about a lot of things. I mean, they do. You could just do a poll on all of them, and you're going to find people you think are unreasonable. You're going to find a lot of them that are unreasonable. Now, if the criteria for thinking they're unreasonable is solid, based on evidence, objective evidence, then you have a right to claim that they're unreasonable. That's me, okay? And I would like to ask you, what's your criteria for what you consider is a reasonable person? I gave you mine just now.
I don't recall you giving me specifically your criteria for understanding reasonable people. There's going to be a lot involved in that. I'm not sure if we want to spend the whole time on that, but I can do that if you want. When it comes to someone who is reasonable, I find them to not be continuously violating formal logic. I find them being able to have dialogues in which I would say that they have good faith efforts in trying to understand the other's position, and that they are trying to give an honest sort of, and I'm giving a very broad sort of understanding of reasonability, where they're trying to give very honest takes on their own positions, where a good conversation can be had, if I can sum it up that way, I guess. A good conversation can be had where I do not believe that the person is being intellectually dishonest or intellectually inept, or just allowing particular feelings to override logic.
Okay, all right. I agree with. I agree with a lot of what you said. But that's not all there is to it.
I don't think we can exhaust it.
Okay. Yeah. Are you aware of the numbers of cognitive biases out there that psychologists have documented with evidence as they observe their patients?
Yeah, there's a lot of cognitive biases. Yeah.
Now they explain why somebody can look evidence in the face and deny it. You know that, right? I mean, just look at in the face and see it in a poll or something like that, and they can still deny it. You know that, right? That's called cognitive bias. What some believers do, probably most, maybe all, is they look for confirmation. It's called confirmation bias. They have a belief, and so they don't seek out the only legitimate thing to do, which is to seek to just confirm what they were raised to believe. They do the opposite. They look for things that confirm it. So they look all around the universe and they see this, and and they'll put on the shelf things that disconfirm it, like an unanswered prayer. Well, we don't know what happened, but this is focused on the prayers that have been answered. Those are called confirmation biases. You understand the difference, and you want to know how many times believers do it.
Well, I don't think anyone apart from God himself would know how many times believers and believers of any sort of ideology do it, but I'm sure there are many times people do that. Yeah.
Well, good. We agree about that. And now the only way, in fact, it's so bad that some research has been done to show that your brain considers information that doesn't comport with what they believe. Sometimes the brain takes up defenses against information that disagrees with them, as if they were under attack, as if the brain and its cells were under attack. That's what happens to the brain when somebody tells you or me things that they don't go well with what we previously have believed. You know that, right? The brain goes in siege mode. It puts up their castle walls and they just refuse to consider it. You know that, right?
Sure.
It's not you. I used to
don't have a reason to believe.
I used to be you. I used to be you. I had a lot of studies in theology and apologetics, and I tell you, I was in that kind of mode. I was in the defensive mode, because it's really strange that you get a belief when you're 17 years old, or even when you're raised, and you hold onto it so tenaciously that even in the face of some really strong evidence, you look away, or you find some other escape mode. And I just think that the sophism here, I just want to highlight that. So you don't need to answer anything to that. I find it interesting that you don't realize what I see plainly on your on what you're doing. You want to comment?
It's a statement. This is cross
It is.
examination. You're supposed to ask questions. I'm supposed to give answers.
What changed me was the desire to find out if I was wrong. I mean, like you were raised in a particular society, a Christianized society. Maybe not, but a lot of people are. And so you had a conversion experience of some kind, and now you're seeking to make a career out of it or something like that. You've got a lot at stake. I know I did. But when it comes to horrendous suffering, if you're going to look at and say, well, whose reason is going to say this is horrible?
A question at the end of this. I hope there's a question at the end of this.
John, I was going to interrupt with that as well. If you could ask questions instead of pontificate a little bit, my apologies, but this is the time for questions.
Well,
a good question might be what my religious spiritual background is, given that you've got it entirely wrong.
I do.
Yeah.
All right, I do. I'll admit, you don't even have to tell me. I do. Well, it just seems like to me that I pointed out to some animals in the animal kingdom that regrow limbs, and they're vegans and they live off photosynthesis, and they don't need. We don't even need animals, because God could create nutrients in our bodies. Just like photosynthesis, and any serious injuries could be dealt with an injection of morphine in our bodies. And you probably believe in an all-powerful, all-knowing God, but it seems easy to me to conceive of something that would be better. And you might say this.
John, can you bring a question here quickly?
Why didn't God do something different, like he did with the animal kingdom?
I don't know. I really don't know. I don't see it as a problem, though, in the first place. So
okay, why don't you see it? I know. Why did you add that? Why do you not see this as a problem? I mean, the first time you hadn't considered it. Now you don't see it as a problem either.
I never said I've never considered it before. I just don't understand why it's a problem. I guess I would have to understand what the problem is. So could you elaborate on that?
Okay.
I know
Well,
I'm asking it for clarification. It's a question of clarification, so I apologize, but like that's at least allowed.
well, people, wonder why God doesn't heal amputees, but He does heal starfish's, limbs, and He does give sharks new teeth. Just as a complete being. I mean, not necessarily
Uh-huh.
talking
Well,
about
I I
how they
answered
eat or
that.
anything.
I did answer that in part in either my opening or my rebuttal, where we talk about the resurrection, where lives and bodies are restored. So the fact that it's not restored immediately is not like doesn't lead to the conclusion that it will never be restored.
But you have to rely. Let's take the story. You talk about the resurrection. Let's talk about doubting Thomas' story in the end of John. He didn't believe until he was going to be able to touch Jesus, and he touched Jesus. So it says, and then he says, "Well, I believe," and Jesus says, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe." The lesson, the moral lesson of that tale is to believe what people tell us there, because Thomas didn't, but now that he saw, we should too. That tale doesn't give you any evidence that Jesus arose from the dead. You know that, right? I mean, that's a story. That's a tale. It's the third hand. If it happened, it's third hand. First the story that the person who did it, then the guy who told the gospel writer of John, then John as he filled it in his story. I wouldn't want to believe that unless I myself was Thomas. Now that's a whole different story. And I can't be, because they're all dead and I'm living in today's world. So there's no reason because of a story to believe something so stupendous, as a man who rose from the dead, and I saw and I touched him. I mean, those
John, can
stories are a dime a
you
dozen.
give
So
Father James a
why would you
chance to
believe that?
answer? Yeah, could you give
Why would
him
you
a
believe
chance
that?
to answer?
If he could just give a clarification, what is that you're saying?
There's no reason to believe a story without corroboration. Now, here's what you do with corroboration: you bring forth the evidence, and
I get the
You
point. Yeah, I get the
clarified.
point. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So, in my answer, and hopefully this isn't going to be counted on my time.
No.
The answer is that it's a bit of a detailed answer, so I'll just give this sort of 2-second summary kind of thing. But looking at the Gospels and the epistles and such, the New Testament evidence, from an academic standpoint, I would say it's actually justifiable to believe in the resurrection, given the evidence that we have on an historical level. So,
Okay. All right. So, Father James, are you ready to begin your second cross exam with questions?
if you can just give me a few seconds, I want to make sure
Yeah,
it's
sure.
the.
When you're ready.
by the way, Jim, you're doing a really good job there.
I'm
really
trying, John. You do need to shorten your thoughts up and come to a question a little bit quicker.
Well, he didn't actually. He didn't actually give me a lot to work off that from my perspective, and I'm sorry to say that.
That's okay. All right, Father James.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to have to get back to this because I think it's central to the debate at hand. So what is who decides what the appropriate level of suffering is?
Okay, I'll answer that. Well, each individual does. I mean, like I said, semis don't, trucks, flowers don't.
Mhm.
Every individual, and what I'm trying to do is trying to say, just like I did with the guy,
So
Thomas story,
I
you need objective evidence.
Yeah. All right. So given that I and many others have decided that, given the evidence of creation that we talked about at the beginning and such, and the reality of evil and suffering, we still conclude that God exists. Why am I not justified? And why, if I get to decide, then am I not then deciding that it is more likely that God exists?
Oh no, you've misread that. No, I'm not saying that everybody's opinion is true. Come on now, why would you even think
I
that?
didn't say that. I didn't say that.
You're asking me a question based on that.
Yeah, it's going back to the question before. Given again, the popular position is that God exists. It's the majority position of the world.
Different gods exist. That's the majority of the world's views on things.
I'm
They're
sorry?
different. Do you know how many gods and goddesses there are? You probably never. Have you ever gone over to India or Pakistan or parts of
Again,
Russia?
you're asking questions on my time. You can ask me those questions on your time. They might be good.
Well, you're
So,
assuming the name God means something to me. Well, it doesn't. It's there's so many gods and
so,
goddesses. Which one?
so there is a consensus understanding of God, and we call it sort of the philosopher's God. Sort of, you look at Plato and Aristotle, you see this tradition, both largely in the West, but also you see elements of it in the East as well, of the philosopher's God, right? So we talk about sort of divine simplicity, and this will come with the question, so I apologize. I just have to explain it for this
No,
part.
you can go ahead. I don't care.
Right. Yeah, divine simplicity, mutability, impassibility, eternality, etc. Those four are the basics of the classical theism that is part of the standard of philosophy. So, given that not everyone, but a majority of the earth holds to something that is akin to that, sufficiently close to that, why is it then not more likely that God exists given your standard that you've given?
Well, there are evil gods. I've read about them over in the Eastern world. I mean, they worship evil gods. I forget the names of them right now, but they worship evil gods in hoping that they won't cause any evil upon themselves, rather than worshiping a good God who would rescue them from the evil gods. They worship the evil gods so that the evil gods won't do anything. I mean, if you look down through the history of Christianity, I mean, one view was the atonement, the ransom view of the atonement. That's a different kind of God who took who allowed for blood to serve as a sacrifice, whereas the other atonement theories are different. God in some views, Occam, he had a different God. God could do anything, even contradictory. I mean, are those different gods? Well, it seems like as you go down through the history of Christianity alone, you find different gods.
Could you explain to me why this is relevant?
They're different gods. You say they hold to one view. Anyway, go ahead. What's the point here exactly?
Yeah. So my point is that if we're trying to establish whether or not it is true that it is likelier that God exists despite the reality of suffering and evil and such horrendous suffering, to use your exact words, given that what we see is your standard is, well, what is the consensus of acceptable suffering, right? So you're saying what's the consensus of what is acceptable horrendous suffering? It seems like we've already gotten that answered, given that a majority of people believe God exists and that there is something that they would all agree is called horrendous suffering, that it exists, yet the majority of people find these irreconcilable. So if you're admitting that, are you admitting then that my position is true, that it is more likely that God exists despite or given the horrendous suffering?
Actually, you bring out a point that I want to highlight on. I want to agree for a minute here and see where I can take this. In the past, say during the conquest of Alexander the Great, or through some of the Roman battles against the barbarians, there were barbarians out there. They fought and they fought and they killed and they relished killing. If you've ever seen any documentaries on the Vikings, they were ruthless bastards. If you look at them, I mean, you had to kill and be killed, and that was how you lived life. They would not have been troubled by so much horrendous suffering because they themselves are horrendous people. If you were to come up to any of these peoples, the barbarians, Genghis Khan, and others across the globe, they were really bad people, and they wouldn't mind slicing your throat out just looking at you. So they would not be too troubled with the horrendous suffering argument. They would look at me and they would say, "You stupid. Are you stupid? No, of course God exists, because their God was just as horrendous as they are." So given that kind of thing, the less bad we become as human beings, then the more that this suffering argument will take place, and we'll see that we'll be more likely to ask our God to be at least more civil.
All right. So then it seems that you're rescinding your claim that we can just sort of look at the consensus of what is appropriate levels of suffering. What is your standard then? What that on what is appropriate levels of suffering?
I never said that we should go with any consensus. I accept no consensus. I would stand on a hill and die on my own behalf, from this point. Now, horrendous suffering makes it refutable that there's a good, omnipotent God.
All right, let's go back again from the beginning. You said that there's a certain amount of suffering that is appropriate.
All right.
Correct?
This is bullshit now at this point. That's worse than sophism. You're going to beat to death. You're going to beat to death something that doesn't matter.
John, you're now making an ad hominem. Please stick to answering the questions.
Oh, I'm not easily offended, so don't worry. I enjoy this. I'm having the time of my life, so don't. I mean, thank you. I appreciate it, Jim, but yeah.
All right.
I mean, I'm not saying like you're doing wrong. You moderate how you just see fit. Just understand, I'm not personally offended. I think I'd get along and have a beer or two with John or something. But yeah. So please explain to me how I am being a sophist, given that what I'm asking is central to the entire claim.
Because your argument here is central to your claim. You project, and that therefore you have to hammer home on a point we've already discussed over and over. One, only people make judgments. So yes, people decide. Two, there's objective evidence that can make people accept things that are true because it's objective evidence. And three, there are people who do not adhere to objective evidence, and they believe like you do. And Doubting Thomas was chided for not doing so, and I think we should just admit that Thomas didn't know what he was doing. So those are the things I'm mentioning. Ask me again, I'll mention them a third time and a fourth time.
I'm a bit confused because the question was how I'm being a sophist, but yeah. So the central claim here that that I'm establishing, and that you're supposed to refute, has to do with the question of God and the amount of horrendous suffering. So it seems only logical to say, well, then how are we establishing what is the acceptable amount of horrendous suffering, given that you said some amount of suffering would not refute God's existence? So you're saying human, right? How do we find out then what the appropriate amount of suffering is?
Yeah, that's sophism. I think I've answered it before. It's like William Lane Craig in his 3-point syllogism. He just. I remember when he first came out with his book in 1979. He says, "Well, the first premise, I don't want to argue. Something comes from nothing. I'm just going to not even argue for that. I'm just going to put that as a brute fact. And so you're just going to say brute fact." People believe, and they believe even though there's horrendous suffering. So, ta-da, John Loftus, see? Gotcha. It's not the case. People believe whatever they want to believe, but people who want to know the truth should believe based on objective evidence. I mean, how many times do you want me to say that? You're just trying to make me say something that you want to hear.
What is the objective evidence that the current level of suffering is inappropriate?
Oh, I've come up with it. It's a horrendous suffering. I mean, tell me something you think is horrendous suffering. What would you just define? Give me an example of horrendous.
You can ask me that on your time.
Yeah, Father James, that does end your time.
Okay.
And John, your 10 minutes is next. Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. Let's try and keep to the questions quickly, please.
All right, James, answer my last question.
Could you repeat it? Sorry.
Yeah. Yes. I want you to describe something you consider horrendous suffering. I mean, maybe it'd be good if you come up with a real case. Not too long, just briefly.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. The communist gulags were horrendous suffering. Yeah. The Nazi concentration camps were horrendous suffering.
You know, I've been. Once you watch a Nazi video on Facebook, you know, of some of the death camps and their tortures, all of a sudden they send you another one and another one and another one. I tell you what, I'm getting 5 of those on Facebook, a day, and I watch them. I watch all the short clips I can because it's just absolutely stunning that people did that. And I did a talk on Christian nationalism that showed that the Lutheran Church was behind that, and the people were largely Christians who did that. So yeah, I accept that. So you would say then that that's horrendous suffering. Now, I want you to tell me about your God again. And what kind of attributes does he have?
Well, God is divinely simple, and
No.
absolutely simple would be one. So that's the first one. The second one is that God is impassive or has impassibility. God is also eternal, and I'm braining out right now. Sorry, I've been traveling all week, so if I seem a bit tired, it's because I've been traveling all week. Without passions, without parts, and eternal, and unchanging are the 4.
Yeah, and passable. I get that. I know that he doesn't suffer feelings. He's not a passionate sort of a person. I get that. These things, these are attributes that have been discussed in the seminary halls, and they. But when it comes to the main ones that we're talking about here, about omniscience and omnibenevolence, and
For
omnipotence.
clarification, that's more of an evangelical approach. I'm holding to a more classical theistic approach. Not that we would not hold to those, but the 4 that are central to us are his divine simplicity, his immutability, his impassibility, and his eternality. Those are the 4 that are important to us.
Yeah. So you, no, I'm not saying that people can't face horrendous suffering and come away still believers, which obviously you have, and obviously people who suffered, have. They wrestle with it quite a bit. I'm not saying it will change people. I'm just saying that they should consider it like I consider it and say, and that's all I can say. I mean, I can't prove you. I can't convince you that I'm right. I'm just arguing that I am, and that you wouldn't have an omnibenevolent God, a perfectly good, infinite, loving God, who would allow this kind of suffering that we call horrendous suffering. And I've given you plenty of examples of that. I think I mentioned about an earthquake that didn't have to happen underwater that would kill hundreds of thousands, 100,000 people. He could actually stop the earthquake from happening before it happened, and then through a perpetual miracle, never let it happen again, so that 250,000 people wouldn't die, and nobody would be the wiser. And these are kind of things. I talked about the animals that didn't have to suffer like they do, and why couldn't God have done that? I mean, it seems like just with a snap of the finger, he could solve a lot of our suffering. And I'll tell you what, I'm here to testify, brother, that I have not had a lot of horrendous suffering take place in my life, but I have had a lot of suffering. And if my life is any indicator, I tell you what, I can be tried with
an observation there. Given what you just said, since you're not really asking a question, I just want to make an observation, if that's all right. So it is interesting to me that in my vocation, I deal with a lot of people who suffer. And I've seen, and I think evidence can bear this out, although I don't have any data, like scientific data, other than my own anecdote for this. But it does seem that the people who actually go through what is often called horrendous suffering are often more likely to believe in God. In fact, the people I know who left the faith were basically, most of them, 90% of them, were leaving the faith because, well, I just want to be really kinky in the bedroom and God won't allow me, so therefore God don't exist. It basically amounted to that. Now, I'm not Please don't take it as me saying anyone here is that. I'm talking about my own personal experience with friends of mine who became atheists. So it seems like it's not the question of suffering, but the question of kinkiness that brings people into atheism on my anecdotal experience.
Well, our experiences are not necessary to be agreed with just because you have them or didn't have them. We're talking about logical arguments. We're talking about arguments that have good evidence for them and are logical. And that's what I mean. I've been offering them.
Are you concluding your time? Or are you?
John, yeah, do you have more questions?
Well, no. I mean, basically, I was just saying what I had to say. I'm quite surprised that you didn't bring up other sorts of things.
Oh,
And
John, if you don't have any more questions, are you going to concede your time and we can move to the conclusions?
yeah, we can go. I mean, we're at loggerheads. I mean, he's just going to ask me the same things. I'm going to say the same thing. Just
Well,
I've already
you have the last cross exam, so this will bring us to our concluding statements.
well, he keeps bringing up that well, he keeps saying that he still believes, even though there's hundreds of something and others do. I mean, he's got to come up with an argument why God didn't make our bodies so that if we fell off a building, we would land on our feet because we had a low terminal velocity, like an ant. An ant would be kicked off a tree and fall and not hurt himself because ants are small and they don't have as much weight. Why didn't God make our bodies like that? I can ask questions all day. He won't answer them, but I mean, you could try. Why didn't God make us really small like that? We could fall and not die.
Because he wanted us this size. I'm not sure. Like, I don't see why that's sufficient to therefore conclude that God doesn't exist.
Why didn't God create us with a better immune systems like the crocodile or vultures that they could withstand all kinds of things? Or dogs can eat so many bad things for them and it doesn't hurt them because of their gastrointestinal innards. You know, why didn't God make us differently like that? We live better lives.
It seems that we don't need it because we conquer the crocodiles and alligators and such. We're better than them.
Why didn't he help us discover vaccines long before we did, or anesthetics? We could drill in teeth or operate on bodies.
I think actually a lot of the Old Testament Levitical law is in part actually to fight against things like viruses and such. The cleansing laws and all that sort of stuff. A lot of that is not just mere ritual. There's a lot of cleanliness involved in it. You know, constantly washing your hands and doing all sorts of things like that. It's a constant washing of your hands for a lot of things. So I think that's actually one example of God actually caring about the viruses that can attack our bodies.
Didn't do enough, did he?
I think he did a lot.
Well, he didn't tell us about penicillin.
No, he didn't. He also didn't tell us about Pluto.
Morphine.
No. He doesn't baby us.
He didn't create us with wings on our back so we could fly. Or gills. Or gills.
Given the size of the human body, it would be very difficult. You'd have to have very, very large wings for that.
Or gills so we could swim in water and not drown. I mean, I know you think that these are really odd kinds of suggestions, but I'm throwing them out because they at least one or more, or half a dozen more of them are certainly good.
I'm imagining it, to give a response to your gills one, for instance. I'm imagining a world where we have gills, and John, and I'm saying this a little bit tongue in cheek, but like John is asking, well, why did God give us gills since this murderer last week killed somebody and then swam into the ocean and we couldn't find the murderer? You know, it's very subjective. It's just, you know, we can always find the bad in something like these things.
Okay.
I recommend you read The Great Divorce if you have not, by C.S. Lewis. It's a really good book.
I don't know how old you are, but I read every apologetic book by C.S. Lewis probably before you were born.
Probably. I was born in 86.
All right. Father James, are you ready for your conclusion?
Usually the positive goes last when it comes to the conclusion.
Okay,
I'm
you're
not.
correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
John, are you ready for your concluding statements?
Yeah.
Okay, and you have 5 minutes. Go ahead.
All right. Let me see here. Well, there's one strategy that apologists use is to maintain God can't help us when free will is involved, or he can't help us very much. God needs to let our free will choices play themselves out. But as it stands, theists are the first ones to say unrestricted freedom is not a good thing. In the case of heinous suffering, we put criminals in prison. We don't let them roam the streets once they are discovered. They lose their freedom in the interest of having a safe society, because safety is a higher value than freedom. The theistic God has a mixed up sense of what is more valuable, for that God thinks human freedom is more valuable than having a safe society. And it's the same token, if you think that there's a Satan, then the very first act you would do once he developed a bad thought or did a bad deed is to lock him up in prison. And all the original sin and all the things that came from it would have been taken care of. All of us have a very limited range of free choices anyway. If we have any at all, the limits of our choices are set by our genetic material and our environment. So it does absolutely no good at all to have free will and not also have the ability to exercise it. Some people don't have the strength needed to stop an attacker, while others don't have the rational capacity needed to spot a con artist. I could not be a world athlete even if I wanted to. Our free will to do what we want is limited by our age, race, gender, mental capacity, financial means, and geographical locality. Since we already have limited choices, then God should further limit our choices if we seek to cause horrific harm to others. Another strategy by apologists is to say that God cannot do away with horrendous suffering because suffering is a necessary byproduct of causal natural laws. To have the one is to have the other. However, the apologist believes God created the universe from nothing along with the laws of nature. So if God can do that, he can also create a different universe with different laws of nature without any horrendous suffering in it. It just doesn't make any sense that God chose to create this world with so much horrific suffering when he could have created a better one without it. Even if God failed to create a good universe initially, he could still do miracles in this world to correct any errors in it. An omnipotent miracle working God could do anything in the material universe, or he's not a miracle working God. Even apologist Richard Swinburne agrees. God is not limited by the laws of nature. He makes them and he can change them or suspend them if he chooses. He can make plants move in quite different ways, and chemical substances explode or not explode under quite different conditions from those which now govern their behavior. Since this world is causing so much horrific suffering, the question for theists is why the laws of this world are fixed and necessary when God could intervene to alleviate the most horrific kinds of suffering. If change in the world requires some miraculous adjustment, what's the problem? People should matter enough to God for that. I wonder if theists have really thought through the implications of a God who prefers this present set of natural laws, which is suffering, over constant miraculous maintenance. Does their God care, or is he lazy? When apologists defend the miracles in the Bible and elsewhere, they will talk about an omnipotent God. An omnipotent God can do anything, they'll say. He's a miracle working God, so it shouldn't be difficult to believe God does miracles. Yet when it comes to alleviating horrendous suffering, many apologists seem to argue that God can't do that. This appears to be nothing less than intellectual dishonesty. Final strategy used by apologists is to punt to mystery. God wants us to believe in him. The truth is, it seems very likely we should be able to see God's reasons for allowing it, since most theists also claim God wants us to believe in him and will condemn us in the afterlife if we don't. More importantly, this answer cuts both ways. We're told we can't understand God's purposes, and this is true. We can't begin to grasp why there is so much suffering in our world. But if God is omniscient, as claimed, he should know how to create a better world, especially since we do have a good idea on how he could have done it better. I could go on. I wrote a whole book on it.
Okay. So, Father James, you ready?
I am.
Okay. Go ahead.
All right. Well, I want to thank Jim for moderating this debate and everyone else in the background. I don't remember all the names of everybody, so I do apologize. I remember a Dean and a Tessia. Maybe they don't want me to give their names. Anyway, I appreciate you all for your help in this, and of course, I want to thank you, John, for being a good, fun interlocutor. I really appreciate it. Hope I was not offensive. I tend to be pretty short in my sort of things, so I like to get straight to the point. So please don't take offense to it, John or anyone else. So yeah, we talked about whether or not it is likelier that God exists, given that there is horrendous suffering in the world. So I think what needs to be established is the level of suffering that is inappropriate, and that's what my point. That's the point of my cross examination. I was trying to find out what is that appropriate level of suffering, and then who determines whether or not we've hit that appropriate level of suffering or gone beyond. Gone beyond it. And I didn't see what the actual standard was. So initially, the standard was, it seemed, that, the people decide. Well, if the people decide, then the people have already decided that it is an appropriate level of suffering, given everything else that we know, that it is not so bad that we therefore conclude God does not exist. The majority of people believe that God exists. The largest religions tend to be monotheistic religions. I think the two largest ones are both Christianity and Mohammedanism. And both of those have a very monotheistic God. And then obviously Judaism has a monotheistic God. So we recognize that that there has to be a standard for what is the appropriate level of suffering. And if it is human determined, then, we've determined that it is not so horrendous that we therefore have to conclude that God does not exist. So I think that the position I have defended has been established and has not been refuted. So I want to thank again everyone, and I'm ready for the Q&A.
All righty. Excellent. So the question is are we ready on our side for the Q&A?
Give me 1 second. 1 second. I'll be right back.
While he's doing that, I don't know if you guys want to chat me over a list.
Got me a soft drink called
okay.
seltzer.
Do you mind if I take a 2-minute break and get a drink myself?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, just ask me a question while he's gone. I mean, if you want, I don't care. I'll tell him what I say.
We'll give it just a second here while we get things ready for the chat questions on our side. I don't think we actually... Okay. And we'll start with... we'll just give everyone a chance here just a second. And chat, if you could, we have just a minute or two. Super chats are great. Questions in chat are also good. If you have any of those, and I'm seeing some across coming up. All right. So I believe we had Ember had posted one from chat. If we could bring that back up. What is one question you wish your opponent had asked you? Father James, if you want to answer first, then I'll give John a chance to answer.
Let's see. What one question? Might have to think about this for a second. I guess one that I could think of maybe would be more about how do I understand God? That was kind of touched on. But maybe a bit more about questions concerning the nature of God. Really, I would have loved to see a defense of it being logically irreconcilable with the existence of evil, so that we could maybe pursue that. But yeah, that's the only one I can really think of right now.
Okay, John.
I can't say I want anybody to ask me a question unless It would be to explain some other things, like the Ten Commandments, as told 3 times in the Hebrew Bible, one of which is famous, and ask the person asking that question. I would say, what would you want to have as 10 commandments that would be better than the existing ones? Like, for instance, there's all kinds of things that are there. I have a whole chapter that talked about the kinds of things that God should have said, like "Thou shalt not beat or mistreat women." And I got like that. Have that commandment. That would be a good one. I would go through that.
All right. Moving on to the next question from Bree Badger. This one is for Father James. If sin is the cause of suffering, such as natural disaster, does that mean sin is the reason why we have tectonic plate movement? How did human sinning cause that? You're on mute.
Me?
I muted myself. All right. None of me.
That's a good
I
question.
never argued that sin is necessarily the cause of all suffering. So that's not my position. So yeah, I don't believe that tectonic plate movement is necessarily due to, every tectonic plate movement is necessarily due to sin. It could be. There are a few different answers. There are insinuations in the Old Testament and possibly the New that there is a pre-Adamic battle that takes place in heaven, and so some theologians have surmised that these sort of tectonic plate movements and things are sort of the results of that in some way or another. That's one possible answer.
Okay. And then we
Do
have.
Don't I get a chance to comment on? I mean, doesn't it go back and forth?
Yeah, sure.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I mean, like I would like that question to be answered by telling us why animals deserved their suffering. You talk about sin in the garden, it doesn't cause all suffering, he says, but a lot of Christians say, well, that's what caused animals to suffer. Why did animals do anything wrong?
Okay. The next question is from Dean Kruger. How does religion address the Epicurean paradox? Let's have some tap dancing Jesus. Either one of you?
Actually, if you don't mind going first, John, and then I will go after.
Well, I can't quote the paradox, but it's a typical problem of evil. If God is good and powerful and all knowing, then why is there evil? That's a good question, and he was probably the oldest one that we know of to ask it, although it might have been asked before. People still quote it. I would love to be quoted, 2 centuries, 2 millennia later, or 3. So he did good by still being quoted. But yeah, that's a great question. If God, that's what we're debating about. Why is there evil if that God exists? And I can't make sense of it. It takes smarter people than me, like James, apparently. So, or not, however it goes.
Yeah. So the problem with it is that. Wait, no, I was unmuted. Okay, I'm more accustomed to StreamYard. I apologize. I'm not as accustomed to this, whatever this is, Talk Studio. So yeah, I don't. I sort of reject the entire argument. I don't think it really follows. So God allows for suffering. For morally sufficient reasons. All you have to do is point that out. And as long as that's even logically possible, then there's nothing that shows that it's logically impossible for an all-living God and all-powerful and all-knowing God to allow for human or suffering or any sort of evil, as long as there are morally sufficient reasons to allow for it. And again, I think there was a misunderstanding of my pointing out the Jim thing. It's an analogy. The reason it's an analogy is that it's not an example. An analogy and an example are different. So the Jim is one that we can all sort of see on a microscopic, on a sort of micro scale. So the Jim is you want to work through those issues in your body so that you have a better body. Likewise, we want to, as humanity, work through those issues in our humanity so that we can have a better humanity.
Okay. And from Cullist, a question for both. Can you conceive of a God that would overcome defeat suffering? So John, since you went
Yes.
first last time, Father James, if you would.
Yes, I can elaborate if you want. I mean, I believe that my God has already defeated death and suffering and sin and the powers of the devil through the resurrection. And so that we are waiting for that return of him so that we can experience that eternity that is without pain and suffering and sin and death.
Okay. John?
Yeah, I can conceive of a God that would overcome and defeat suffering. I make suggestions throughout my writings, especially in God and Horrendous Suffering, the second edition. And if God had done that, the kinds of things I suggest in my book. See, I don't see there's any reason why we would think God is even smart. You know, that they talk about an omniscient God. Well, you know, I proved him wrong time and time again, because what we're dealing with is not an omniscient God. We're talking about the writers of the Bible, you know, and theologians. So if you can point the writers of the Bible and theologians wrong as they speak for God, then you can say to yourself, well, you know what? I have a better concept of God, that if that God exists, we wouldn't have any suffering to concern about. Things I've mentioned
Okay.
today and earlier and on other times.
Right. And we have the next question. You took that off too quick. There we go. We just did that one. We have surely we have another question. Okay. This is from Terja. She wants to ask, she's behind the scenes at the moment. Father James, do you believe God is all good? You're on mute.
Keep doing that. God is the very definition of good.
Okay.
There,
Do we have any other
Colas has
questions?
a follow-up. Colas has a follow-up. Would that God be more powerful or more good than the Christian God? Yeah. So what was that in response to? I'm trying to find. Was it in response to the thought guy or whatever? I think that's what
Yes.
he's talking about.
Yeah.
So let me go ahead and look at it. Would that God be more powerful or more good than the Christian God if we didn't need to wait for actual suffering to end? Not necessarily. I don't see why patience is a bad thing. It would have to be established that patience is something that is evil.
Okay. If Jesus had made it plain to not blame the descendants of Jews for his death, would that have resulted in less suffering?
I think he did make it plain.
I forget who went first last time, so.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, my computer's kind
Yeah,
of
we can
running
hear you.
slow. Oh, yeah. What Jesus did or didn't say, I'll let him go ahead and comment. I'm not.
Yeah, I can elaborate if you want. Yeah. Yeah, he made it plain. He talks about salvation coming from the Jews. He talks about how, I mean, he himself is a Jew. That's very clear in the New Testament. The entire series of books collapse if Jesus is not a Jew, because it does not even then pretend to follow after the Old Testament, which is very clear that the Messiah comes from the line of David, who is a Jew. And you read things like, I mean, point to like looking at Galatians and looking at Romans, you see that, and again, the majority of Christian followers at the time were Jews. So this idea that anti-Semitism is something that's defensible in the New Testament, I would say, is very clearly not true. So,
Okay. If God is whoops. What would it take for If we could settle on one question so I can read it. All right. If God is a definition of if God is a definition of good, why does he allow any evil at all?
So there are morally sufficient reasons, would be the idea. So I can give some examples to sort of help with it. We're talking about, going back to the garden. However literally you want to take it, it has to be true enough to where this is actually exemplary for all of humanity, and that there are actual consequences that happen from this. So I do believe that Adam and Eve are real people, that there's something akin to what we see in Genesis 1-3 that happens in the Garden of Eden. And because of that decision that is made, what we have decided is, rather than go the route that God established for us, which is to slowly and surely come to a point to where we can know the knowledge of good and evil and be responsible with that knowledge, we decided to get the knowledge of good and evil before we could become responsible with our knowledge. And that is just what we see exemplary in all of human nature today. So God allows us to make that decision because we as humanity are actually in charge of the universe as the representatives of God. So when we have an heir, right, that we have, I'm bequeathing all of this to you, son, all, of my mansions and all these sorts of things. Well, we want that heir to actually be responsible. And we see this all the time. When the heir is babied and coddled, what happens? He is a horrible mismanager of the property that's bequeathed to him. So God has given us this property, this universe. He gave us two options. We could either slowly but surely come to the knowledge of good and evil, to where we understand why there's good and why there's evil, and understand the difference between the two, and go through the proper path that way, or we could learn about it right away and then have to deal with the consequences and work backwards from there, kind of thing. So we decided the second option, and we are living with those consequences to where now we have to work through those issues that we have, in part, been responsible for. So, yeah.
Okay. And if we have the next question, John, did you want to respond?
Well, I mean, I conceded in my opening statement that since we have physical bodies and we live in a physical world, I can see where some pain is probably unavoidable. Although David Hume, I think he said that God could teach us lessons by pleasure, not pain. And so you have different views on that sort of stuff. But I'm focusing on horrendous suffering, as you know.
Okay. All right. And the final question. What evidence would change your mind? And I think, Father James, you went first on the last one. Anyone care if John goes first on this one?
It's fine with me.
Go ahead.
Well, I bet you're hoping that I would say, well, nothing would change my mind. But what the evidence did change my mind. And I tell about it in my book, Why I Became an Atheist. Just recently, somebody texted me and said that book changed his life. So, you might want to give that a shot. And if you're not worried about the evidence, then go ahead and tackle that on. More than one people have tried to read that and have been talked some sense into them. But I think that there's a lot that could change my mind now, but most all of it has to do with what took place in history. Like, for instance, if they snatched the foreskin of Jesus and then matched it up with his resurrected body, and there were the clinic people looking, and they found that there was a match, then that might convince me. If there was a actual pillar of salt that was tested, and they found that it was a female DNA in it, then we might think it was Job's wife who got turned into a pillar of salt. If the creation story was factual rather than making out the the sun, moon, and stars to be like just above the mountains that you could build a Tower of Babel to. If that kind of stuff wasn't in the Bible, then I suppose, if the actual universe was told to us long before science found it out, then that might help. If the morals in it were better, rather than killing a gal and dismembering her and sending her to 12 of the different tribes, or 11 of them, so that they could go to war against the Benjamites. If that kind of stuff wasn't there and sanctioned by God, then that might help. If you can find some reason why Jesus died on the cross that atones for sin, I don't have to hit somebody in order to forgive them. You don't punish somebody before you forgive them, and there's a lot of people who never get punished, and you've forgiven them. So there's no relationship between punishment and forgiveness. So you just do it. Allah is better than Yahweh because He can do it. He can forgive without an atoning sacrifice. There's a better God to begin with. If you can explain the Trinity to me, I know you think you do, but I've looked at it, and they keep going round and round in a circle every decade or so. If you can explain that kind of stuff and more, and if you give me some evidence for miracles, corroborated evidence, evidence where I could sit down and talk with the people in the story and ask them for the scar. Let me see the scars myself, or in your hand, or let me put something under a microscope. Of a baby that was born. Let's just find of a miracle, virgin birth. Let's test the DNA there, and they try to explain how you can even have a human being without human semen. You didn't even have a complete human chromosome. So if you can explain those sorts of things and give me those sorts of evidences, then I might even change my mind to this day. But it has to do with what happened in history. History would have to be changed, and since you can't change history, then pretty much I don't see how I'm going to be changed either.
Okay. Father James?
Yeah, so I'm presuming the question is about changing your mind about God existing. So the question of evil does not really shake my faith in the existence of God, that it's not reliant upon, God is nice to me, therefore He exists. The reason on a philosophical level that I believe God exists is that I cannot think of any even logically possible answer other than this. So what is the first cause? What is the first action that happens? The first action that happens, let's look at the on the surface of it, at least, possible answers. The first action is self-caused, as in self-willed. The action is deciding to happen, or that action was caused by a previous action, or there's an infinite chain of causal actions. And so let's go backwards with that. The infinite chain, I would say, does not work, and I talked about this in my opening, that they just, you can't have an infinite chain of events like that going backwards in the past. At least on an ontological level, I would say. And then the second one is the idea that the first act was caused by a previous action. Well, that obviously doesn't work because it's no longer the first action, which then leads to collapsing into the infinite regress issue. So then the third one is the only one that I can see that makes sense, which is the first action is a self-willed action. That is the only thing where we even have a logical sort of concept that even slightly makes sense. So if I were proven to my satisfaction that I was wrong in that argumentation, then I would probably have to reconsider whether or not I believe God exists. But then there are just so many other things that would at least get the ball rolling if I could see that there's another way in which we can understand the beginning of everything.
Okay. Well, folks, I would like to thank our two debaters for a wonderful and fun, a wonderful and fun and lively debate, and for also keeping to your times as best you could, and also to everybody behind the scenes. Thank you, everybody back there, Terja and Dean and Wes, and I know I'm forgetting some people. Thank you all for doing that. And thank you to our viewers and people who are watching now and who will watch in the future for watching. We do greatly appreciate the time you have given us. And I hope that you'll give it to us again on our next debate, which I don't know what it is, but I'm sure it'll be a good one. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time on The Thought Experiment.
Thanks for watching The Thought Experiment, the arena where religion, politics, and philosophy step into the ring and ideas get tested. Here, we don't dodge the hard questions. We confront them. We weigh arguments, challenge assumptions, and follow the evidence wherever it leads. If you enjoy sharp thinking and honest debate, you're in the right place. Like the video if you found it thought-provoking, subscribe so you never miss a debate, and most importantly, tell us in the comments who won tonight. We read them, we feature them, and sometimes they shape the next episode. Until next time, keep thinking, and we'll see you in the next thought experiment.